Hello, everyone, and thank you very much for joining us today on this webinar, Rethinking ESG, what works and what to avoid. My name is Luke Buckingham. I'm a business development manager here at Drooms, and very, very lucky to be joined by four amazing guests who are all ESG experts in their respective fields. So firstly, I'd like to introduce, and I'm going to apologize from the get-go in terms of my pronunciation. I'm going to do my absolute best, but these names are quite unique. So first of all to the stage is Lutz Kantier, who is from Hansen Merker Grund Vermorgen. And I'd like to introduce himself first and tell me where he is from and what he's up to.
Very good, Luke. Thank you.
Thank you.
So, my name is Lutz Kantier. I work at Hansen Merkur Grundvermögen. I have a technical and a commercial background. And so it happened that in 2021, I took over the newly founded ESG unit at Hansen Merkur Grundvermögen.
Thank you, Lutz. Lutz, because of your background, you're quite far away from the camera, which means you can't actually see you, just only your lovely background. So perhaps you can move yourself closer to the screen or remove your background if possible. Otherwise, we can't see you.
I manage it parallel.
Thank you very much. Next up is Johanna Fuchs-Böhnig from Systeco.
Hi, Luke. Thanks for the introduction. Yes, Johanna Fuchs-Böhnig. I'm the CEO of Systeco. We are a Bosch company. We are offering a digital data platform for the real estate industry to make building data visible and usable. And my background is, in fact, also real estate. I've been in transaction management for quite some time. I started out some 20 years ago in London with CBRE and EY, and have now joined from Deutsche Finance Group here at Systeco.
Thank you, Joanna. We next have Brigitte Geritze from Redevco.
Hi, Luke. Yes, I'm very sorry to have all these difficult names for you, but you're doing a great job, so that's fine. Yeah. My name is Brigitte Geritze, Head of Research and Strategy within Redevco. Redevco is managing 10 billion of assets, mainly in Europe, 7 regions in Europe, and mainly retail. But we have a big growth ambition and we want to diversify in other asset classes in the coming decades. And ESG is very high on our agenda. And I'm mainly concerned about how to align our new strategies with our ESG ambitions.
Thank you very much. And last but by no means least is the wonderful Pia Maria Goulson, who has just joined Drooms as our Director of Business Development. Pia.
Yeah, hi to everyone. I'm very happy to be here. I just really recently joined this month's Drooms as a Director of Business Development, and ESG has been, or let's say sustainability has been a leitmotif of my career over the last 20 years within the industry, starting with, if some of you might remember, environmental due diligence in a transaction, which was a total different thing than we were talking today, going over to non-financial disclosure reporting, and then my last career that was in a SaaS company, which had a platform supporting the ESG reporting in the latest standards. So that's why I'm here, and I'm looking forward to the discussion on things.
Brilliant, thank you. Well, now we have our esteemed guests who have introduced themselves. Let's get started. First thing is I'd like to start by asking a bit more about our audience, and I believe my lovely Emily is going to set a poll up for you guys now. Has anyone received the poll? Okay, is that coming through? Brilliant. And I'm sure Emily will share that with us later. So first question, and I'll start by asking Lutz, please. A word about the status quo. where does the real estate industry stand in terms of ESG right now, please, Lutz?
Well, so the positive thing is there is a high activity and also creativity in new ESG topics, from construction, regulation, documentation, software, and everything else we have never seen before. And this is why I'm very positive on this topic. However, I think ESG is very volatile in terms of prioritization, political wise, economical wise. It's been the same the last 2-3 centuries. And unfortunately, we have the recent years, the new economical and political issues we have, without calling them all. And this is why somehow ESG has to step back or is pushed back, however you want to name it. And the impact is clear. There is a lack of investment activity, and this has an impact also on ESG topics. So this would be my view on the current situation.
Thank you very much. Pia, do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, yeah, I agree with Lutz on the investment part, but I see like two directions. Major players are way ahead, and they have their strategies set, and they have their measurements in place, and they're going forward, while others are still very reluctant for obvious reasons of financing. It's a saying as goes like, who should pay for all this? And so there's, I think, two directions, one the advanced ones and one the kind of a little bit behind companies.
Okay, thank you. Johanna.
I can really only agree with both Lutz and Pia. That's what we find as well. There is a pretty big spectrum, I think, in the market. I would absolutely agree with Pia that the big players, and also in my estimate, frankly, the smart players are well ahead of the game and have looked into ESG and have actually seen the opportunities that come with this. I think there's a perception in the market that there is only obligations to come with ESG rather than looking at this with all the potential savings, for example, you can achieve there with the tenant satisfaction you can have when you look at the S in ESG. So I think everything from not started yet to fatigue to seeing the opportunity and doing something about it.
Brilliant, thank you. So it's very interesting to think about this kind of this spectrum that you've identified, and I think part of the reason for such a spectrum is because of the sheer amount of reporting and procedures and measurement tools that are out there at the moment. So Brigitte, perhaps you can maybe say a word on kind of the benchmarks and methods that you're currently using to measure ESG performance in your company.
Yeah, and that has everything to do with what was just said, because we have committed ourselves to making our entire portfolio net zero carbon by 2040. And we're trying to do everything we can to do it as fast as we can, because we think it's needed. And then when you look at it from that perspective, then everything that's going on in the economics for the last few years, that's only a short wave. And we really want to have a look further in the future. So it can be difficult, of course, when you see what's happening in the world right now and all the uncertainties and the economy. But you have to separate that from your long-term view and what you're really trying to aim for.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think it's a very, very difficult landscape at the moment. Johanna, any thoughts?
Thoughts yet? Just the mute button, apologies. Yeah, once more, I can only agree. I believe really that it is a question of measuring your actual ESG impact as well. That seems to be a challenge for a lot of people, understandably so. I mean, obviously, the technical equipment of buildings is very diverse, and real estate is a very diverse asset class when it comes to that. And I would also say, though, that there are sometimes perceived hurdles that perhaps could be tackled if people were to look at it. And the other thing I would like to pick up is the level of ambition that people have here. I mean, real estate is a big contributor to our current environmental situation. So it would be great if people become a bit more aware of this as well. And as to the then concrete measures, that obviously depends on the buildings and on the aims and goals you have.
Mhm.
Agree. I think it's a huge argument between carrot and stick at the moment.
Yes.
Let's have a look at the next poll. So to our audience, please, in your experience, what has been the most effective ESG measure implemented in your company? And I believe you have 4 options there. And whilst that is being answered, I'm going to pose that question to Lutz as well, please.
Yeah, well, so given these 4 points, so I would say that what we did, we set up an ESG strategy. First of all, that we have a common understanding where to move to. So everybody's talking about ESG. For most of us, it is compared to be new. However, there are some people working for centuries in this area already. But we have to form a common understanding, and we have to give a signal to the market that we are serious on achieving our ESG aims. So that's why we said we need a strategy and a rating of our portfolio. We did as well with in this case with eCore, because everybody is talking about ESG rating, but there is no standard. And this is a big obstacle until today, which I personally cannot really understand. I mean, there can be hundreds of different ESG ratings, but they should agree on a number of, let's say, 50 or 20 topics. Everybody should have it implemented so that we can compare the data. So that would be very helpful.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think the lack of standardization across all of the reporting tools is creating difficulty, particularly in the real estate sector. Pia, any thoughts on that initial question, please?
Yeah, maybe also getting back to your previous question, what is the benchmark? What is the measurement standard? And I think the CRREM-PAS or the stranding risk calculation is a real good standard, and it's the gold standard, obviously, in transaction to judge portfolios and the status of portfolios, but it's also a good starting point for the crucial question when to invest and when to settle measurements. And another point is what is the most effective is low-hanging fruits. And I think you had there on the poll renewable energy. That is obviously something, and knowing that I would come to this point in the discussion, I brought an example I heard in a different panel last week, 2 weeks ago, and there's the comparison between changing 100 windows, and that would cost 90,000 euros and give you 6,000 kilowatt hours less of energy consumption. While if you implement a controlling system in the communal areas on the light switches and in the communal areas, which costs you 7,000 euros, you could have 14,000 kilowatt hours of energy savings. So, I think we haven't yet in all places starting to deal with low-hanging fruits. And so there is this big saying, stop overthinking, start doing. And there's a lot to be done before we reach a crucial point where we have heavy and serious investments to do.
Yeah,
May I interject here, Luke? Because
please, Johanna, go.
Pia, you absolutely speak my mind and heart. I also really think that whilst you are absolutely all very right that there is a lack of standard, and of course the taxonomy is so confusing, but picking the low-hanging fruits, getting started with something, is so tremendously important. And the confusion that sometimes there shouldn't stop people from starting things. And I've heard on another event the other day, somebody in a rather accusatory fashion said, well, you know, if you ask 5 consultants about your CRM stranding point, you get 5 different answers. So, you know, how am I supposed to deal with this? And they understand that's true, of course. But have you ever asked 5 different valuers what your building is worth? I mean, yes, you will get different answers. Doesn't matter. It will point you in the right direction, and then you can act on it.
Yeah, and if you do, well, we often say if you do something, you can try to do it perfect at once, and then try to reach for 2 big steps of 50%. But you can also do 50 steps of 2%. Just get it started. That's it. Absolutely, and don't try to argue that it's difficult because of the data and all the measurements, because we all know what can we do and what's the good thing to do. So, and that can be different from everyone, but it's that's fine. That can be your own signature within your company, and it can really be inspiring to your company. And maybe you do something else, and that the industry can learn from it. I strongly believe this is a non-competitive subject. So one company does it this way, the other one does it that way, and then we can both learn from it.
I couldn't agree with all of you or more. I think there's such a wealth of information out there, but 2050 net zero, that's a huge kind of mountain to climb. And I think chipping away at that to get to start is the most important part. And kind of makes me think about the definition of sustainability is meeting the needs of the present without compromising the needs of future generations to meet their needs. And I think actually if we can try to address something today for tomorrow and future, I think that'll be a huge win. Johanna, you kind of mentioned something about hurdles earlier on in a previous question. So I'm going to pose this question to you first. And we've sort of already scratched the surface a little bit. What would be kind of maybe your top 3 hurdles for implementing a kind of a meaningful ESG progress into your company at the moment?
Well, to me, it is lack of data. And that goes, by the way, hand in hand with the lack of digitalization, because the data is there. It is just often in a format that it can't be used. So that is a big hurdle, like, measuring where we are at, and then having the facts to make actually good decisions to meet the obligations we have here, and also the opportunities. I'm not tired to ask. And then I think, and I mean this in the nicest possible way, but I think there is a certain perception of hurdles that are not necessarily there. The low-hanging fruit that were mentioned, absolutely right. And B, it doesn't cost millions and millions to get going on your building. This is simply not true. You can often with very small measures achieve quite a bit when you actually look. And the third thing, and this, and I apologize, this is my personal pet peeve, is this idea that ESG has to be financed through an ROI, and that, there can't be a world where, God forbid, we actually invest in the performance of our buildings. I reject that wholeheartedly. In the same way as you as you invest into the maintenance of your building, ESG should be something that you naturally invest in, not just because it's the right thing to do, but because your tenants want it as well. It is the right decision. And for your children, by the way, also a good idea.
Yeah.
Brilliant. I couldn't agree more, Johanna. Lutz, any thoughts?
Yeah, Johanna, I completely agree with what you said. It's exactly that. It's good points with the capex, because some people really think of we need another budget for ESG and it will cost millions and billions, and that's definitely not the truth. This ridiculous discussion in Germany with the so-called Wärmepumpe. I mean, at a certain point, you have to renew your technical installations anyway. And nobody would, however there are politics or not, would invest in an old-fashioned technology. They would automatically, if they set their mindset, would automatically switch to a wärmepumpe. And another point, so recently I've been to different talks, and so what I heard very often, and I totally agree as well, is lack of mindset. So unfortunately, and this is proven science-based by sociologists, psychologists, we have a problem with shifting around, starting new ways of acting. And so unfortunately, we humans are very poor in this change. And this is a very big hurdle for the further process, I would say.
Mm-hmm. But when you discuss what a building needs, and you can't compare it with doing nothing. So that's, I think, a big hurdle. As soon as you start thinking, well, we have to do something anyway, and you can really calculate that when you do it earlier, it will cost you less than when you do it later. So there's all the evidence. So I think you're right, Lutz. It's more an emotional thing and a thing that people think it's scary or expensive, and it's a trade-off with profitability than it's anything else. But it's, misinformation in most cases. Absolutely. Yeah.
I'm very happy, Jana, that you pointed out that we actually sometimes we don't have the lack of data, but we just don't know where the data is stored, the data is existing. So looking from our perspective into documents, there is a documentation, but this leads us also to the whole process on the various stakeholders. You know, sometimes ESG is still so glass house or in a separate department, but the future will bring that ESG is part of the whole process in the industry, and then there will not be the question who's providing which data and what point. And on the other hand, we have to see that there's so many various ways of approaching stakeholders. Yeah, you mentioned the tenants. You know, we have to face tenants who will not be willing to rent out the buildings if they're not sustainable. That's coming up, and it's already on the forefront here. So this will be a change, and not seeing what the actual stakeholder and what the actual goal for my strategy is. That's maybe the biggest hurdle, and it's only an excuse to say regulations are not clear. Goals should be clear.
Well said.
Yeah, I really enjoyed that question, that discussion. I think mindset seems to be the real buzzword there. And I think that comes down to stakeholder engagement and education and getting people to think forward rather than kind of this is how we've done it. We try to think about a different way of doing it. So great question, great answers. Thank you so much. So very closely related to that, talking about kind of the buzzword that is ESG. Does anyone have any strong opinions on kind of turning ESG on its head? Thinking about sort of GSE or SGE. Pia, maybe start with you.
Well, I think the greatest push sometimes is still when you have to do something. So governance is maybe should be or is practically the first letter. You know, you have to do something, then you start thinking about it in a more serious way, and then obviously the environmental part is the nearest, as the biggest, as the most measurable part. We already had the topics of energy consumption and so forth, which is also a factor in the rental view. And the social part is very tricky to measure, even more than the other points. And there's so much different interpretation of this fact all over Europe. If you compare UK opinions to German, where social means sozial, which has a total different perfume, let's say. So yeah, sure, there's a taxonomy, the social taxonomy on the horizon, but I think there's still a long way to go. So for me, S would be the last letter, not because it's less important, but you know, seeing who tackles what first is I would say GES.
Thank you, Peer. Brigitte, any thoughts?
Yeah, I'm not sure it's about the order. I understand what you're saying, but they all go hand in hand, of course. So, and it's true that we are talking much more on the E already for the last half hour than on the S and the G, and so the S needs more attention. And working on the S, it can be so inspiring. It really makes you feel that you can make a difference. I always say, well, when a building or a location doesn't have a social value, it won't have a future value, and therefore no economic value. So it's all go hands in hand. But maybe I can add even that there's a letter missing on the E and the S and the G, and we now understand much better that we also have to think about the N of nature, on the biodiversity, on combat climate change, on water and waste management. All these no urban sprawl, really try to fit into the current urban fabric, things like that. So it will evolve even more, I'm sure, and it will be not less complicated, but even more complicated. We better be prepared for that.
Very, very good point indeed. I like your thoughts on the end there. Johanna.
Yeah, you know what? I'm missing another letter, which is O for opportunity. I know a lot of people would perceive the O as obligation, but I cannot stress this point enough. This is such a chance to also look at your portfolios from an asset management point of view, from maintaining values, and then hopefully, once the cycle starts again, also increasing values. I just think potentially because of the taxonomy and because people feel like, you only do that if you are somebody who's being a goody two-shoes. I really strongly disagree. I think from a purely commercial point of view, ESG, all three letters are essential in a proper portfolio management strategy. So yeah, if I could, I would start with the letter O, and then the others. It almost doesn't matter in which order, because they go hand in hand. You can't have one without the other.
Thank you. Lutz, any thoughts?
Yeah. So I would say for the time being, it's not that everything is new just because we are talking about ESG now. I'm always saying it's all the same. Until today, nothing changed so dramatically, and most of it's already there. So, for example, money laundering. I mean, we fought it back the last years, maybe not enough, but that's not new just because we are talking about S&G now. And so please don't misunderstand. I'm not saying S&G are not important, but I would stick to the story, and the story, as I understood, was we have to work on environmental aspects, but we only achieve that goal if we consider S&G as well. So that's the story how I understood, and therefore I would stick to the ESG, which doesn't mean S&G is not important.
Thank you. Some really interesting thoughts there. Perhaps I can just kind of maybe just pose this question to four of you. In terms of the S, why do we think that quite often the S is kind of the last thing that's thought about? And second question to that is, have you seen or done any kind of S implementation to your strategy that would be kind of easy to replicate? And I guess the third question would be actually is, have you seen any kind of metrics that you can measure social value improvements which are not necessarily as easy as, say, E and G? That's to anyone who wants to answer.
Lot of questions. Yeah, well, maybe it's because we are in the real estate business, and there used to be a big gap between the owner and the tenant, and that you really thought, okay, we provide the building or the place, and then the tenant, well, for example, we do have a lot of retail buildings, and then you really think the tenant, the retailer, they will do the social value, but now we are changing into another kind of environment that the relationship between the tenant and the owner is changing, and that you can work much more together, and that you really think we can do this together and we can really make this a better place, a nice place. Things like vacancy in a building, that can be perfectly fine from an economic point of view, but from a social point of view, it's not fine if a few floors above the retail floors are empty. So what can we do with it? And then really reach out to the community and try to find out what's needed there. So yeah, it's a bit of out of our comfort zone sometimes, and sometimes we think, oh, it's not up to us to interfere with that. So we really have to step over that. Maybe that's another hurdle. Yeah.
I agree. If I may, I'll continue. I think, and I hope I'm not stepping on anybody's toes, it is also a function of the cycle we just had. I mean, there have been at least 12 to 15 years where you had to engage very little with proactive asset management and with maintaining the value and engaging with your tenants. In fact, quite often there have been situations where it would have been commercially beneficial for your tenant to leave so that you can release at much higher rents, for example. And I think, I don't think I'm saying anything controversial, but that's over for now. I think now you actually should engage with your tenants. And exactly as you just said, it makes a difference how your building is being lived in, so to speak, or how it's being used. And not only this, I mean, in the office market, we also find that with not just since COVID are people rethinking whether they want to work from home or how they come to the office. So these are all social aspects we need to engage with. And again, really driven from a commercial point of view. You do not have to be a good person to think about this and think about your assets' values. And the other thing I think is also look at your own staff happiness. I mean, that is something we didn't perhaps need to look at so much over the last few years because people could be could be incentivized with a lot of money that was swirling around. And now we have to look at different values. I just think there's thoughts around there.
Yeah, and maybe to give an example, we have a beautiful asset in Oxford Street in London. It's retail on the ground level and offices above, and we're now transforming this building and also adding a rooftop garden on top of the building. So our asset manager for that building went to people living directly around this building and rang the door and said, well, we are opening this rooftop garden and you can use it, and we want to be part more of the community. But the other people, they don't trust it. What do you want from me? Is this really is it really, why do you offer this to me? So it takes a lot of reaching out, and a bit it can be a bit strange to do that, but in the end it has a huge effect, and we're now much more involved with what everything is going on in the neighborhood, and then you know much better what's needed there. So yeah, and it's nice. It's nice to do.
My hat goes off to that asset manager. I think post-COVID era, it's really nice to see people re-engaging with people face to face as opposed to reliant so much on Teams or email or questionnaires. So that's great. That's a really nice example. Thank you. I guess that leads us quite nicely into our next question, and I'm going to invite our audience to engage in this question, please. So audience, what is one ESG trend that you hope to see develop in the next 5 years, please? And I guess whilst that's being answered, I'd like to ask my guests, and we'll start with Pia on this one. What do you feel is next in terms of ESG within the real estate industry? It could be regulation, trends, standards, whatever kind of opportunities. So go back to the O that Johanna mentioned earlier. Like, what do you see happening in the next kind of few years, Pia?
Well, I think, as I mentioned before, the shift will go into the process, into everyone in the so from the owner, asset manager, and tenant, they will all be engaged in the same strategies and in the same measurements of the ESG. It will push even in the company level, coming up with CSDR on the horizon, which again will be mentioned maybe later as another hurdle to, be kind of deer in headlights and saying, oh my God, please let's wait and see what develops. That could be another shocking moment maybe. But I think this stopping to have ESG in a separate department somewhere to bring it in the whole company will be a development. There will be, in my opinion, much more demand by the tenant, and not just commercial tenants, but also residential tenants will, even with a shortage of residential housing, which we face here in Germany, there will be the demand of how is the surrounding and how is the sustainability in the building, especially in the young generation, having the need for communal spaces, etc. I think that's the long-term trend I would see.
Pia, I couldn't agree more. I think embedding sustainability consultants and experts across all lines of business within an organization is absolutely critical, as opposed to having the pigeonholed sustainability team. Brilliant answer. Thank you. Lutz, please.
Yeah, well, a bit general, but hopefully I think we pick the real operational driver. So sometimes I have the feeling we are focusing too much on bureaucracy and documentation, and so my top topic is waste. So I think we waste time on this, because there is later in the process a big break when we export waste to other foreign countries. So this is for me a ridiculous topic. In Germany, one aspect which would be definitely helpful is simplified and accelerated regulatory, because when I think about smart metering, collecting data, tenants' data, it's ridiculous. So, I mean, Italians are much better on it. French people have it done already. And we are not already seeing a solution, how it could work. And that drives me crazy. So we definitely have to come over these obstacles and then hopefully accelerate the process.
Thank you. Brigitte, any thoughts?
Yeah, well, innovation can definitely help. So you already mentioned, Lutz, the smart buildings, and that can also be very inspirational for the owner and the tenants to see, okay, everything we do really does matter, and it makes it better. So smart buildings, having a digital twin building to make sure what you can do with the building in the future, recycle. We have been starting, so we try not to demolish if we can avoid it, and if we have to, then we do urban mining, things like that. So it really is a big driver for innovation and new solutions to come up. Yeah.
Maybe one last thought. I mean, it's not very popular, but valuation hasn't taken much into consideration ESG factors due to lack of comparables, lack of transaction, etc. So I see this really upcoming, because it's obvious that, especially if I look in your direction, Brigitte, in the Netherlands, you can't even rent out certain buildings anymore. So this is pending, and we will see devaluation coming with due to stranding risk, due to environmental risk, and that probably will give another push on the topic, I would say.
Yeah. Internally, when we have a redevelopment project going to the IC, then we make sure that there's the future value estimated, and then set against the do nothing scenario. So and that really helps the discussion in the boardroom to take the extra step, to take the extra mile.
Yeah.
Because from the valuation point of view, they can't prove it. I understand where they're coming from, so we need to help them and set up our own values. Yeah.
Johanna, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I hope this, what I perceive shift in mindset will continue. I mean, this is subjective, of course, but it feels like 2 years ago at Expo Real in Munich in Germany, people were just like, ESG, is this a thing? And now, only 2 years later, everybody has the terminology, they have the language. I think this continues. And I really hope for a regulatory easement, for lack of a better word, as well, because that the EU needs to get a grip. They need to at least decide what the regulation is it's going to be, and not just release new ideas, what feels like on a daily basis. That's not true, of course, but I hope they get that under control. And then I really hope for the innovation side of things to take hold. There are already so many fantastic solutions out in the market, so many fantastic solution providers that can help asset managers and investors to improve their buildings. And I really very much hope that this whole industry becomes a little bit more interested in innovation and what they can do. And digitalization obviously goes hand in hand with this. We're leaving an opportunity on the table.
I completely agree, and I think Pierre, you mentioned a lovely fact about kind of optimization of windows, and Brigitte, you mentioned sort of smart buildings and digital twins, and obviously Johanna, you're talking about the innovation and technology there. And I think from my point of view, there's such an exciting opportunity at the moment out there in terms of technologies that exist for the real estate market. So maybe just an extra question would be, is anyone seeing something in particular that has really kind of piqued their interest and is really helping make significant progress towards meeting ESG targets?
I don't have a solution. I'm just saying I completely agree with what Johanna just said. So for me, it's a little bit, sorry for blaming my own industry, but the real estate sector is really so old-fashioned. It's unbelievable. So I see in the middle there is a real estate industry, and all around are the startups coming up with new innovations which are very helpful. But so old meets new, and they have to learn each other. Something new. So I think it's a pretty long way we have to go in the real estate industry. And if I compare to other industries and talking to friends of mine, it's really frustrating because other industries are really on another level. Sorry for saying that. But there is a bit way to go.
Yeah, we're very good at explaining why it's more difficult for us than for others. But in fact, that can't be true, of course. So when you see the offices now with the labeling of the offices, that you really can get stranded assets because of the wrong label. I'm sure this is going to help. So you will always have innovators and laggards, but the wait and see approach that we now do in this industry is holding us back. We can do much better. Absolutely.
Brilliant. Thank you. One thing that's kind of been the sort of tip of everyone's tongue has been the social taxonomy that's kind of coming up. Pierre, do you have any kind of thoughts on how that may influence property deals?
Well, not really, because for me, it's still very far in the horizon. It's on the EU level. There are the discussions on the papers are ongoing, and we've seen with the previous taxonomy steps how long it took to kind of drop into the operational life of real estate. So it's an interesting discussion, absolutely on a level of experts, but to really come down into the operations, who are already, like Lutz mentioned very nicely, very far behind. I'm a believer in a social taxonomy, but I'm not a believer that it will start soon enough in the operations. I'm sorry to be a bit skeptical. this point.
No, fair enough. Lutz?
Sorry, I lost my my point. So, sorry, your question again was?
How do you perceive the upcoming social taxonomy sort of having an influence on property deals?
Okay, I missed the social part. So actually, I think let's waste the time not saying social isn't important, but we have to use this effort for other aspects. Why? Because I think it's taking care already in standard regulations on national basis. Again, it's not all new, just we are talking about ESG. There are suspects, okay, but I don't think we need this big tool of taxonomy to address this. And in general terms, sorry, that's why I misunderstood your question. In general terms, without social, I'm just focusing or wondering how will the investment activity come back and how comes that deals come true again. So who's desperate, who wants to buy, who wants to sell, what has to happen that the investment activity comes back?
Mm-hmm.
Sure.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. Brigitte, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, well, the real estate industry, we have a big responsibility with everything that's going on demographic shifts and the migration and the need for affordability and attainability on housing. And if we make the wrong decisions, then it's there for another 30 years before we can solve it again. So yes, you better do it right the first time. And that means not only from a profitability, but definitely also on the sustainability and on the social aspects. So if this is needed to get our industry more aware of that, that's fine. Yes. Yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you. Going to move on to our last question now, but just to kind of make people aware, the audience, that there is going to be an opportunity for your Q&A. So if you'd like to ask a question, please just write that in the chat, and hopefully our esteemed guests will be able to answer that questions there. So final question to kind of end today's webinar, which has been absolutely fantastic. So thank you. The same question as always, for those that haven't really started giving their ESG sort of much thought in terms of progress, what would be your advice in terms of getting started? And let's start with Johanna, please.
To say the very obvious is get started. Therein lies the answer. Start doing stuff. You can do things. There are very, very low-hanging fruit to have. And also, I know I'm repeating myself, but I love this. See the opportunity in here. What you can do on your assets. To look at this purely from an obligation point of view is simply factually wrong. And also don't forget all the opportunity that lie really in digitalization and in innovation. Like Lutz said, other industries have nailed this easily and years before us, and we can do the same.
Well, thank you. Brigitte?
Yeah, well, it's indeed, that's it. Just start and don't wait until you think it's all perfect. And if you have the feeling that you can't do it alone, well, look for like-minded partners and do it together. We always find like-minded partners if we want to do something new, and then you can speed up a lot of things. So that's always good advice. And the other thing is, well, we constantly try to be a force for good by heart and by head. And if you really feel like being a force of good, then you can never take the wrong decisions. So you will never regret it if you do it like that.
I couldn't agree more. Lutz?
Yeah, I completely agree. Take small steps, but get started and remain taking over responsibility, because that's what everybody did before and now as well. So we are always saying we see ESG as one aspect of a risk analyze. So it's just a point which needs to be managed. So dive into it like in other subjects and be successful.
Agree. Pia, finally.
Well, I would say also start with the obvious. Check your strategy, your enterprise strategy against sustainability goals. So there's so much. It's not just one ESG. It's ESG on the various aspects. Do you want to do let's say the bare minimum and have a low risk and be compliant? You can undertake other measurements. If you want to, as Johanna points out, take opportunities, if you want to make an impact, if you want to go as far as doing an SFDR regulation fund, let's say Article 8, which is already a big step ahead, this is a different story at all. So don't stop yourself by saying, oh my God, taxonomy, but see what implications are for your specific enterprise case. This is one advice I'd say, and then obviously start doing things and start immediately. It's not going to go away, and be aware that if you don't do anything, the value of your assets will and can decrease. And also one thing, Lutz said, we're a very old-fashioned industry, and sometimes it's even good to remember the good old days, because if some of us have been in the industry also quite long, energy saving regimes have been in place for over the last 20, 30 years, if I remember rightly. So it's not like, oh, all of a sudden, some crazy people in Europe have decided to do energy saving regulations. So also CapEx calculations we do every single year. So now we have to do CapEx calculations considering ESG factors, but it's still a CapEx calculation with the same terms we had before. So check what is a process you already know and you're familiar with, and you can improve with innovation and with the new view on ESG. So that will be my stake on that.
Perfect.
I think absolutely brilliant points from all of you there, and I think the key thing for me has been probably twofold: is mindsets and is getting started. And I think if we look at the kind of the mountain of 2050 net zero, is you've got to start somewhere, and you have to start at base camp. You've got to start at point one and move forward. And whatever you do, as Brigitte said, is that you won't regret that decision at all. So a really, really insightful webinar. Thank you so much. And Pia, just to echo your points there, there might be an old-fashioned mindset, but it is a very sociable and huge network of an industry. So I think best practice is so easily shared. So brilliant. We do have some time for some questions for our incredible guests. So if you have any questions, please do pose it on the Q&A or chat function on your chat. And we have one who's come through now from... Oh, we've got a few actually. So Stefan has said, are there really professionals in the market who haven't started? Pia, you are nodding your head.
I'm nodding my head because I'm just coming from a convention last 2 days, and there was also quite a lot of mid-sized companies, and they were starting a discussion of like, in this current situation, we can't pay for this, so we won't do this. We wait, we stop it, and I was truly shocked, because I'm maybe coming from the ESG bubble, you know, where everyone is doing something, and I was surprised to see that those mid-sized and smaller companies are really stepping on the brakes. You know, maybe for a survival mode for other reasons, but still, there are yes, Stefan, there are a lot of companies not doing anything and waiting.
Thank you. And we have a question from Peter as well. Peter is a asset manager of a small portfolio, approximately 80 million euro. Straddle date is mid-late to 2030s. Should I wait to see if more certainty involves in the ESG space, or is this short-term thinking and rather act sooner rather than later?
Act sooner rather than later. I mean, honestly, it doesn't matter whether your stranding point is in 2030 or in 2040. What this shows you is that there is something to be improved, of which you will most likely benefit. I personally don't think we will have just stranded assets in the world in 2040 or otherwise. Of course not. We cannot just, rebuild everything we have. So there will be changes, but the longer we wait, we really have an impact on our environment. I mean, genuinely, and nobody has anything of a building that is drowning in water because of adverse weather events. We genuinely have to do something here. And secondly, even if your stranding point gets moved later, you will reap the gains now. So please do something now. We can help you.
Well, I would also add that the straddle date, if you look at the straddle date, and as I said, we did CapEx planning always and ever in the past. If you look at the straddle date, also look at the term of your lease terms. You can't just look at the straddle date as an isolated point in time. You have to see if lease terminates earlier, and then you will have to struggle to relet the assets, because tenants will have a different opinion even before 2030. So be aware of that.
Brilliant. Thank you. I don't believe any more questions, so really just left to me to say a massive thank you to Lutz, to Pierre, to Johanna, and to Brigitte for your amazing insights and opinions. I found it thoroughly enjoyable. Thank you to our audience for attending. I hope you guys were walking away with some clearer goals and incentives of what you're going to do next. And if you missed part of the webinar, it is recorded, which will be shared on our website, as well as there are some white papers and some newsletters that you can subscribe to as well for further information. So for me, thank you very, very much, everyone. It's been an absolute pleasure, and I hope to see you all again very soon.
Thank you, Luke.
Thank you, Luke.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Bye.
Bye.